My name is Gasia Mikaelian, and I'm coming to you through KTVU Fox 2 News serving the San Francisco Bay Area. Today we are talking about gratitude in the time of COVID and how it can help us all. I'm so happy to welcome to this discussion Emiliana Simon-Thomas. You're from the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. Thanks for joining us.
That's right. Thank you, Gasia, for inviting me, and I'm excited for our conversation.
So let's talk about gratitude. Why is it especially important right now?
So there are three things that happen when people either are grateful just by their personality, or when people practice or exercise or try to strengthen their gratitude. One, they become more optimistic because gratitude means that we're paying attention to what is good in our lives. We're paying attention to things that benefit us. Two, we become less self-focused. Gratitude is about things that are good that aren't the result of our own effort or anything that we've had to work towards or earn. They're those goodnesses that we just get because we are lucky in so many ways. So again, we're not thinking about ourselves and the work we have to do. We're thinking about the world around us. And the third thing that gratitude does is it connects us to each other. When we feel grateful for another person's kind acts or any kind of behavior that has led to a positive outcome for us, we strengthen the ties between the pathways in our brain that help us understand each other and the pathways in our brain that signal reward and pleasure. So we find more joy in one another and a greater sense of connection when we practice and experience gratitude.
Does this happen on both ends, the person doing the kind act as well as the person receiving it?
Yeah, so the neat thing about gratitude studies that involve looking at what happens when people express gratitude. So when I say thank you to you because I've received some kind of benefit from an action that you've conducted, is that statement actually reminds us of what we've done. It reminds us of what the goodness that's come of it. And it also reminds us of the effort that we've put into whatever we've done for another person. So both the person receiving that signal of gratitude and the person actually articulating the gratitude benefit by bringing to mind, again, this positivity, this shared benefit that we can exchange with one another, and this kind of softening of the typical transactional way that we think about ourselves and each other. So yeah, both people benefit from the exchange of gratitude.
How does science back up what you're saying?
Well, researchers have surveyed thousands of people and looked at how grateful they are, how much does their personality include this sense of reverence for what is given, this sense of appreciation for goodness, and shown that people who are more grateful are happier. They experience positive emotions more readily and more often. They have lower blood pressure. They're more resilient to stress. Studies have been done in veterans and shown that people who go into trauma-imposing situations actually manage their feelings more productively and in a more growth and healing and learning-oriented way when they come into those experiences as more grateful people. They've also shown that learning gratitude or practicing or exercising gratitude after a difficult event leads to greater recovery, quicker recovery from those setbacks. So we're more resilient, we're happier. And then finally, of course, our relationships are more satisfying. When we bring couples into the laboratory and we watch how they interact, when couples thank one another, they have a greater sense of ease, they don't have as much conflict, they're less vulnerable to divorce, and they're just more satisfied with their relationships. They feel more sense of closeness and love with one another.
A lot of people might say, look, I hear what you're saying, but my husband is on my last nerve, right? I've loved him for 20 something years, but all of a sudden the man cannot load a dishwasher correctly. How might what you're saying apply specifically to us in any number of ways during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it takes work. Like any other skill or practice or exercise where we want to get better at something that we think is good, getting better at gratitude is going to take exercise, and it's not always easy. It doesn't always feel natural. We have to actually go out of our way and say thank you for the ways that other people actually do bring something positive into our lives. And it's not always the thing that we necessarily expect or are looking for. What we know about humans is it's really easy to keep track of what we do because we're in the middle middle of our own experience. And it's not as easy to keep track of what everyone else is doing and what other people's experiences are like. And so gratitude is a way to cross that bridge. It's a way to really notice and tune in to ways that our close friends and family are actually doing things that we may not have noticed that, again, lead to goodness in our own life. So maybe it's not unloading the dishwasher. Maybe it's some other task that, again, we don't think of, straightening the cushions on the couch, having a meaningful conversation with a neighbor that cements that closeness and community that's so valuable to us. Those things that we kind of take for granted, they end up being pretty important, and gratitude is a way to bring them back into the spotlight.
You made me think of the day, or one of the days, when I got upset at my husband over this darn dishwasher. I had set the dishwasher to wash, and I said, I'm running out for a quick errand. When it's done, please unload the dishwasher. This is, my husband and our two little boys. So I did my Target run. I came back home and I found them all in the garage working on their mountain bikes, just as happy as they can be. I went upstairs and you guessed it, dishwasher had not been emptied, and I freaked. And I said, I asked you to do one thing and you didn't do the one thing, and back and forth and back and forth. And it took me at least a good full day to realize that he was in the garage with our boys doing something that only he could do for and with them, right? I don't do the greasy bike chain thing. He was spending solid time with our boys doing what they love most. And I thought, God, I could have emptied that dishwasher. It took me 3 minutes. And so, but it was such a 180 from how I was feeling when I walked into that kitchen after I had done my errand. Is that what I should be doing? The 180, is that what we should be doing every day?
That's a perfect example. I couldn't have come up with a better one myself. Really orienting to the things that other people do that bring out some kind of positive outcome for you is so, so valuable. We don't spend as much time agonizing about the little things that didn't get done that we need or we want, but instead we can recognize indeed that time that your spouse spent with your children. It's not just things that you didn't end up having to do. It's also that your children had that closeness, that support, that time with an adult who was attuning to them, and that is going to save you all kinds of effort later on that you might have had to spend if they felt neglected. So here you are noticing something wonderful that's happening that the person that you spend the most close time with is actually offering and providing. So yeah, that's exactly right. That's what gratitude's for.
What do you say to the person who likes everything you're saying? They say, I get it, I like it, I believe in it. But sometimes it feels a little bit hokey saying, wow, thanks for bagging my groceries so carefully. I hate it when the bread gets squished. I mean, do you know what I mean? There's kind of, it feels weird when you have to say it, at least in the very beginning.
I say everything feels weird when you're first starting. It doesn't just come for free. It's not just a one-time exercise. We try it and notice how the other person responds, right? 99% of the time, the person's going to show this kind of lifting of their shoulders and opening of their chest. And oh, wow, how nice that that person noticed what I was doing instead of just going on with their day or looking at their device and just being sort of consumed with their own personal issues. It's really rewarding on its own right, and going out on a little bit of a limb to say thank you. And I really like what you did, because you didn't just say, hey, thanks. You said, thank you for bagging my groceries. I dislike it when something bad happens to my groceries, when my bread gets squished. I really like it when I get home and everything is intact. And the last thing you could add, if you wanted another challenge, was, I know you could have been doing something else. I know you could have spent your time in a different way, and you decided to invest your effort into bagging my groceries carefully. Could have done it flippantly, could have done it casually and, with a lazy hand, but you did it carefully, and that meant something to me. So it's a little bit funny to do these more specific or detailed kinds of expressions of gratitude when we get started, but you'll see the reward is its own benefit. Like, you'll feel other people's enjoyment of your expression, and it feels good in yourself.
How long have you been doing this kind of work?
Geez, I've been studying emotions like gratitude and experiences, interpersonal experiences, like sharing in ways that convey that you're interested in other people's welfare. I also study compassion. I also study the emotional experience of awe, or being in the presence of something that sort of defies your normal expectations. 15 years. It's been a while. I know. Now you all know how old I am.
Well, I wanted to ask you, 15 years in, do you find that finally, in the face of a global pandemic, people are getting the message you've been trying to put out for a decade and a half?
I think that there's a lot of interest in well-being, and it's come from the changes that we've all had to grapple with around the pandemic. People are struggling with not having the same degree of social contact. People are struggling with the uncertainty of all the situations that we're grappling with, and that's really made us dig deep and try to figure out, well, what can we do? Even if we find ourselves in fortunate, perhaps privileged, relatively comfortable lives, we're still feeling pretty upset. And how do we manage that? What can we do to make a difference for ourselves? And what can we do to really invest in our communities so that we have a greater sense of fairness and equality and community that really is conducive to everyone's restoring that well-being that we so much enjoy and appreciate?
Would you say that gratitude will help us not only get through the pandemic, but also post-pandemic? How can, I mean, look, there are days when pretty much anybody, myself included, I'll say, look, I am miserable. I don't want to get out of bed. I want the Netflix and a big bowl of popcorn, and don't bother me. But you can't do that for the next 6 months, right? So at a certain point, when we do sort of rejoin society, how we view what this pandemic has been and is continuing to be in a way that doesn't just remind us 2020 stank, I had to take a pay cut, my uncle got sick and we almost lost our house. How can you help shape that inner dialogue?
I really hope that the pandemic has been a time of reflection, and it's been given us an opportunity to really dwell on the privilege and the opportunities that we perhaps began to take for granted in the times that we didn't have to grapple with the same circumstances. One of the things that gratitude does is it diminishes that sense of entitlement, right? It again softens that transactional orientation to the world that we live in. Everything doesn't come from a tit for tat. Everything isn't about your effort and your worth and your sense of self-esteem. A lot of what we enjoy is the result of our collective interaction, to our collaborative existence, to the way that we fold into communities. And gratitude as an emotional experience and as a personality trait is there to help us find one another, to notice goodness, to remind us that we have these relationships, and to strengthen our social bonds, to bind us together. And I'm hoping that, again, the contrast between the pandemic times and what we can look forward to will inspire us to carry forth in a way that makes it less likely that we'll again fall into a more complacent, taking this precious life that we have in front of us for granted manner.
Was there ever any time in your long history in this field where you did feel that the country was coming together in a way that you hadn't seen happen before? Or is this truly the first time you're observing this sort of phenomenon on such a grand scale?
I think that there have been several different elections in both directions in our history, and each election in some regards represents a coming together around a particular person or a particular platform. And it's not always the one that I agree with or the one that I disagree with. I think it's remarkable that we function in such a complex and ornate democratic society. And I think that the pandemic is unique. I think that it is unprecedented in its power to remind us of what it means to be human and how important it is as humans to invest in our collective welfare, to sort of cater our institutions towards everyone and not necessarily invest in divisiveness or hostility. Those things really end up causing more trouble than they provide any sort of help.
I was having a conversation, of course, through the computer with someone I work with, and it became pretty clear early on that he and I don't share the same political views. And then we kind of put that aside and moved on and did our work. And then another day it happened to pop up that he loves mid-century modern architecture. And I thought, well, I love mid-century. And so we started sharing with each other. Have you seen this house? Did you see this house? And we talked about what we love about mid-century modern homes. And, you know, it was as if we were brother and sister. and it was so interesting to me how we could be so far apart on one thing and yet so close on something else that's somewhat personal. I thought, that guy's a great guy. Why did I even, you know, for a second think, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about? You know, is that sort of connection probably like gold in today's environment?
It's one of the most promising strategies for having a meaningful conversation with somebody who you feel ideologically opposed to. And the one that you described, which is finding some common value or interest or passion with another person that maybe is outside of the scope of what you disagree about. When we have that sense of common humanity, we're just much more likely to empathize with one another. And we know this from research in participants who get their brains measured while we're trying to elicit empathy. If they think the other person is like them, if they think that they're similar, their empathy circuits are more activated than if they think the other person is somehow a rival or an enemy of some sort. So yeah, establishing that commonality, that common ground is a really valuable way to, again, be able to even begin to have a meaningful conversation. So while you've set up this precedent where you have this space of agreement and this sense of connection and just valuing one another as humans, you'll have an easier time should you ever decide to broach the topic of the topics upon which you disagree. There was just an editorial today in Science Magazine about difficult conversations, and it described a case very much like you just did, where a young woman who was a research scientist went around and talked to her neighbors in Montana about the climate. And she knew that people were going to disagree with her, but she just asked them questions about their experience and listened, and then tried to talk about the things that she heard them say that she could connect with. And in your example, it was architecture. Right. So that's okay. That's okay to talk about that. And then when you have space and time to broach the other topics.
What do you think of the phrase that I know you've heard, we're all in this together? You know, now it's like the tagline for any advertisement, right? Buy a truck, we'll get you there safely because we're all in this together. The problem, as you know, is that while we are all in this pandemic, some people like you and I are very fortunate to be able to do our work from home. We're still employed. We each have a roof over our head and, you know, health in our families. And then there are other people who have lost their jobs, have lost a loved one due to COVID, are struggling with illness themselves. You know, there are lines at the Alameda County Food Bank of people lining up to put food on the table. When you hear that phrase, we're all in this together, how does that ring to you?
I think it's on its surface really delightful. I think what it's meant to convey is we all play a role in how this goes, and it's important for us to invest as much as we can in serving the collective need to supporting the welfare of our communities. I can understand how if you were in a situation where none of your needs were being met and you saw that signage in a place where somebody seemed really privileged and provided for, that it might feel superficial, right? It might feel like, well, they're just saying that because then they don't have to do anything. And that's the challenge, right? If you're going to use that phrase, I think it's very, very important to back it up with true concern and action, right? Maintaining your sense of concern is valuable, right? It's not necessarily the case that we can all come up with a solution. I may not be able to solve the problem that has led to people lining up at the Alameda Food Bank, but I care and it matters to me. And if there is some way that I can help, I will. And so that's the commitment that comes with we're all in this together. It's not just a tagline that you put up and then decide you don't have to do anything anymore. You can pretend that other people's struggles are not relevant to you. It really means you gotta walk the talk and live it to give it, right? Actually go out and do something that makes a difference.
And so finally, we've talked a little bit about, extending a hand to your neighbor. My little boy, we have our neighbors, Elvin and Joyce. They're in their mid 70s. And so my little boys take their garbage cans back up to the house and that sort of thing. What are some easy ways that you can help us, maybe those who feel a little bit weird saying, thank you for bagging my groceries so nicely, or doing something physical to their neighbors' garbage cans? What are some ways we can easily practice and show gratitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to actually reflect on it in your own mind if you're a little bit more private. One of the interventions that has published results in terms of benefit and impact is to keep a gratitude journal. This is just an exercise where at the end of the day, you write down 3 things that happened in that day that you feel grateful for. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something profound or dramatic. It can simply be that you have fresh air to breathe, and that having fresh air to breathe just makes it easy. And those of us who have lived through circumstances where the air has been compromised, perhaps in wildfire season, can really relate to how much of a privilege and a delight it is to have fresh air. So if you can get in the habit of bringing gratitude to the forefront of your awareness, it will become more readily available to you by habit. And so that's an exercise that someone can try if they're not as comfortable being interpersonal. I think that gratitude as a sort of briefer expression is also a viable way to start. If you're not ready to do the whole, what did you do and how much effort did you put in and how did it benefit you? Just actually saying it. What we know from the research is that people really do value gratitude. Most people feel like gratitude is a virtue that they aspire to. They rate themselves as grateful, but then when you ask people about society, they feel like gratitude is declining. And for those of you who are mathematical, that's just not a plausible scenario. We can't all be grateful and increasingly grateful, but society's gratitude is going down. But the explanation for that is we see ourselves as grateful, but we're not hearing it or feeling it from each other. And so we got to be part of that change and start to say thank you. We need to just say thank you as often as we can to each other and in genuine and authentic ways.
I'll share one quick way that gratitude came to me, and then I'll ask you if you have any examples that you'd like to share. Because it strikes me that I know you now as someone who works at a prestigious university, is part of this important center. But if I'm bagging your groceries, right, I don't know who you are. So I'll share my little tidbit, and then I'd love to hear one from you as we close the conversation. I work with a young woman whose partner works at a salt factory, the Cargill Salt something here in the Bay Area. And she and I were joking about how I saw some butter on sale. It was a really expensive brand, but it was really marked down, and it was unsalted butter. But I bought it because it was so cheap. And she goes, well, figures it was cheap because it was unsalted.
Yeah.
And so we joked that I love salt and I love salty things. And then she told me a couple days later, she goes, you know what? My partner brought home a couple boxes of salt and said, when you get to go back to the office, give this to Gasia because he loves salt. I work in salt. Like, let me, and I thought, oh my gosh, look, a box of salt maybe cost what, $4, but just the fact that she had gone home and obviously shared our little interaction with her significant other. And then he went to work and saw a couple boxes of salt that I guess were going to be thrown out or something and said, let me bring that home. It to this day warms my heart. And so I think, that little 2 seconds of intent from her has given me a mile of happiness and gratitude. So, so now I turn to you. Is there anything like that has sort of hit you out of surprise that just, means so much to you?
You know what that sounds like is what's called random acts of kindness. Now that might sound like a bumper sticker in Berkeley, but actually it's a legitimate exercise that has been studied in laboratory settings. Researchers have assigned certain people to be the benefactors, so to actually commit random acts of kindness, and some people to be the recipients, so they get random acts of kindness, and then they have people who witness that exchange and have shown that being generous in that way, investing in others' welfare, leads to improvements in well-being, not just in the person doing it, but also the recipient and the third parties. When they witness that, they benefit, but then there's this virality to it. They also feel the urge to be kind and invest in the welfare of others who they come into contact with. So absolutely, those little moments where you can think of, I should do this little tiny thing. And often we sort of turn it off. We go, oh, no, I don't have time. Or, oh, that was great to think about, but I'm not going to do it. Try to just do it the next time, right? Try to just do it the next time. And one great example, and this is back to the person bagging your groceries. Maybe you don't want to thank them for that, but maybe you notice they have a cute sweater on, or maybe you like something about their baseball hat. And you can say, hey, I really like your baseball hat, or where did you get that sweater? And just this small talk invitation to connect with somebody and their humanity in this moment that could otherwise be perceived as entirely transactional is a really nice way to build that sense of connection and commonality. So yeah, we call it small talk and we call it random acts of kindness. All these things are of benefit to your well-being.
You know what I hate now is we're all wearing masks. And so whereas I used to smile at the cute baby in the stroller, or, you know, the lady in front of me at the checkout, no one knows if I'm smiling. So I find that I've actually become more verbal. Instead of smiling, I'll say like, hi, baby, you know, things like that. Do you think that the wearing of masks is impeding our friendliness at all as a society?
I think it's harder for people to immediately or instantaneously read each other's emotional expressions, but I will share that one of the most common tasks that we use to evaluate a person's capacity to judge or identify others' emotions actually only shows the eyes. Right? Our eyes are extraordinarily expressive. When you genuinely smile, these little things happen around your eyes. These little muscles contract in a way that is immediately recognizable as a genuine smile. So it's a little harder to see from far away, but if you're close enough that someone can actually see those changes around your forehead and your eyes, they know you're smiling. So I like what you did also, though, which is, you know, infuse a different signal, a different modality into the expression. So don't just rely on your face. You can also use your voice. And if you're in company of somebody who you can safely share space with, we also communicate a lot about our emotions through touch. So a hand on the shoulder says a lot in terms of your interest in being supportive, in your presence, in your willingness or enthusiasm about, again, sharing space with another person. So there are lots of different modalities. We also use our bodies. So we have postural cues that convey to others how we're feeling. So learning a little bit more about all the different modalities that we have for expressing emotions and maybe using them more than we might otherwise when we used to be able to just rely on the face could be another way to, again, make that human contact with each other.
And finally, before we have to wrap this up, are there any online resources or perhaps your center's website that you'd like to point our viewers to, either those who may be learning about gratitude for the first time today or thinking, I want to learn a lot more about some things I might already be thinking about doing? Where would you point us to online?
Yeah, I'm going to give you 3 resources. The first is the Greater Good Science Center website, which is really an online magazine. And what we do there is write about cutting edge science in ways that anybody could understand that are meant to be very practical. The second is a website called Greater Good in Action. And what it is a library of exercises and activities and practices that anyone can use on a day-to-day basis to facilitate or foster or enhance or strengthen their well-being by sort of strengthening their connections with others, by sort of giving rise to more enjoyable and positive moments in their day, and by strengthening their resilience, their capacity to handle upsets and setbacks and difficulties. And then the third one is our Science of Happiness podcast. So anybody can go find Science of Happiness on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts. And what we do there is we find a guest. The guest chooses a happiness practice, right, from the GGIA site. They try it, they tell us how it went, they tell us how it impacted them. And then we interview the scientist who actually did the research that showed that that particular activity or exercise leads to measurable change. And each of the episodes are like 20 minutes. And yeah, those are 3 different ways you could learn more.
All right, you've given us some good homework. I've had such a great time talking with you. I was anticipating this conversation, so that gave me joy all week. And now that I've had the chance to meet you, I'm going to go, hopefully spread your good news first to my little family and then to all our viewers. So a big thank you again to you, Emiliana Simon-Thomas from the Greater Good Science Center in Berkeley, California. Thank you so much for all the help you've given us. I hope you stay healthy and well.
Thank you. So glad to have had the chance to talk with you also.